He dropped the coffee mug on purpose, not out of anger, not even by accident. He simply let go of it. The ceramic hit the edge of the sink, cracked in two, and slid into the basin with a soft, almost polite clink. Raymond stood still for a moment, watching the steam rise from the spill. His breath didn't quicken. His eyes didn't move. He reached for a dish towel, wiped the counter like nothing happened, and then turned the kitchen radio off. Silence returned instantly, heavier than the cold air seeping through the window panes. In the next room, the piano sat under its usual layer of dust. A faded green quilt covered the keys like an old secret someone tried to forget but didn't quite manage to. Outside, snow pressed against the glass, thick, windless snow, the kind that blankets everything in quiet. Inside, nothing moved. Raymond checked the wall clock. It was 5 minutes slow. He reached up, nudged the minute hand forward, then stepped back. That was his morning ritual. Break something, fix something, pretend it evened out. He made toast he didn't want, buttered one slice, let it go cold on the plate. Sat down, stared out the window. The town was barely visible. A few porch lights still burned down the hill, but the street below was empty. It always was, except for Wednesdays when the garbage truck passed by at 6:10 sharp. Raymond liked that kind of certainty. Machines had reasons, people didn't. He looked at the chair across from him. It was empty but always pulled out. He never pushed it back in. He wasn't sure why. Maybe habit, maybe hope, maybe just muscle memory, like setting 2 plates out and only putting food on one. Raymond rose from the table, left the toast untouched, and walked toward the hallway. He passed the photo frames without looking, each one holding a life no longer in motion. A wedding photo with too much light. A boy in glasses holding a fishing rod. A snapshot of 2 hands over piano keys mid-laughter. All behind glass now. He stopped at the edge of the living room. There it was, the piano. It hadn't been played in 5 winters. He used to clean it weekly, tune it monthly, and now he barely remembered the sound of the top F key. He didn't know if it still worked. The quilt covering the keys had a small tear near the center. He reached down, fingered the edge. Dust lifted gently into the air. He didn't remove the cover, just stood there, one hand resting on the wood like a man visiting a grave he still couldn't speak at. The silence thickened around him. No ticking clock in this room. No sound of the wind, not even the heater. Just the faint hum of memory pushing at the edges of the present. He closed his eyes. A note echoed in his mind, middle C, followed by a G. A child's song, played one-handed. He opened his eyes again. The piano was still closed. The room still empty. Raymond exhaled slowly as if he'd been holding something in for days. He turned away, walked back into the kitchen, picked up the broken mug pieces, placed them gently in the trash. The toast was still cold. The butter hadn't melted. He took one bite, then dropped the rest in the sink. In the garage, the old space heater groaned to life as he flipped the breaker. His workshop smelled like sawdust and oil. He liked that. It didn't change. He pulled on his flannel jacket, checked the time again. Still 5 minutes ahead now. There was no plan for the day, no client, no call to make. Just another quiet morning, in a house where even the music forgot to visit. But somewhere down the road at the edge of town, a boy with bruised knuckles and a mouthful of silence had just been suspended from school for the 3rd time this winter. And though Raymond didn't know it yet, their days, his and the boys, were about to bend toward each other. Not through fate, not through miracle, just through a moment that would feel at first like nothing at all. A gesture, a pair of gloves, a note played by mistake, and it would start here in a house too quiet for winter. The hallway smelled like floor wax and damp jackets. Somewhere a bell rang late. Nobody hurried. It was the kind of school that had stopped rushing years ago. Lainey stood by the lockers near the back door, arms crossed over her gray coat. Her breath showed in the cold even inside. The heating always struggled on this side of the building. She didn't mind. Cold air cleared the head. Across from her, slouched against the cinder block wall, Theo stared at the ground. Black hoodie. Hands jammed into his pockets, shoelaces untied. His backpack lay at his feet, half-zipped and crumpled like he didn't care what fell out. Or maybe he did care, and that was the problem. Lainey didn't speak first. She had learned years ago that silence worked better than lectures. Theo shifted his weight. "I wasn't smoking," he said. Lainey raised one eyebrow. "You were holding a cigarette. Not lit. Your friend ran." "He's not my friend." Lainey exhaled through her nose. She had dealt with kids like Theo before, sharp-edged, all elbows and avoidance. But there was something different in this one. Something watchful, like a stray animal that had been fed just enough to stay near, but never enough to trust. She glanced out the door window. Snow drifted against the chain-link fence. January didn't pull punches in this town. "Sit," she said, nodding toward the bench by the lockers. Theo didn't move. "Sit, or I write it up. Your choice." He sat, not because he was scared, just tired. Lainey took out her clipboard, no pen in hand yet. "This is your third time back here in 2 months," she said calmly. "Didn't ask to be. That much is clear." She watched him as he folded into himself, smaller than the attitude suggested. His hair was too long, his knuckles bruised, his jaw set in that way boys do when they'd rather be punched than pitied. Lainey's voice softened, almost imperceptibly. "Your mother didn't answer her phone." Shocker. "Anyone else I should call?" Theo didn't answer. She waited. Silence again. "I'll give you a choice," she said at last. "Write up in suspension. Or you help janitor duty for the rest of the week. No arguments. No shortcuts." Theo looked up at her then. Eyes dark, unreadable. "Why do you care?" Lainey blinked. Not from surprise, but from something else. A flicker of memory. "Because someone should, because I wish someone had, because it shouldn't always be punishment or silence." She didn't say any of that, just held his gaze and replied, "I don't have the luxury not to." Theo studied her, as if trying to decide whether that answer meant anything. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll mop your stupid floors." Lainey nodded. No smile. No thank you. Just a quiet agreement. She watched as he stood, pulled his bag on one shoulder and shuffled toward the supply closet. When he turned the corner, she stayed a moment longer. Alone in the hall, the air still cold. Her hands still crossed, not from defiance, but from habit. Through the small square window in the door, she saw the snow pick up again. And in her pocket, her phone vibrated. Another message from the district office. Another reminder of a life that asked for rules but gave no room for people like Theo, or people like her. Lainey slid the phone back in her coat, then walked away from the door toward her office. There would be more boys like him, more days like this. But something about this one didn't feel like the others. Something had shifted, just slightly. The wind had picked up by late afternoon. It wasn't loud, just constant sifting through alleyways, piling white against doorsteps and making every movement feel heavier. Raymond stood by the back of the hardware store, hands in his coat pockets, staring at the busted hinge of a delivery gate. The screws were stripped, wood rotting. He wasn't there for a job, just out walking, if you could call it that. He hated the word stuck, but it fit most days. He didn't hear the kid at first, just a shape down the sidewalk, hunched, jacket too thin, walking like the wind was pushing straight through his spine. Theo didn't look up. The boy passed him without noticing. One of his shoes was untied again. Snow clung to his cuffs. He kept walking toward nothing, it seemed. No bus stop, no bike, no friend. Raymond watched him go 5, 10 steps. Then, without thinking, he pulled off his gloves. They weren't new. Brown leather, faded at the fingertips, one seam stitched twice where it had split last fall. He had worn them every winter since his wife passed. They still smelled faintly of pine and hand soap. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them in slants. Theo turned slightly when he sensed movement. Not startled, just aware, the way strays are. Raymond didn't speak. He simply extended the gloves, palm open. Theo looked down, then back up. His face unreadable. Not curious, not grateful, just unsure. The wind blew stronger. The boy's hands were red. The skin cracked near the knuckles. He didn't take the gloves, not right away. They stood like that for a moment, two strangers in a town too small for strangers, neither blinking, neither speaking. Then Theo reached out slowly, like expecting the offer to vanish before it reached him. He took the gloves, didn't say thank you, didn't put them on, just shoved them into his pocket and kept walking. Raymond didn't watch him leave. He turned back to the gate, inspected the hinge again. His fingers stiffened from the cold almost immediately. But something in his chest felt warmer. Not joy, not pride, just less frozen. He walked home the long way through the trail behind the post office, past the bench by the frozen pond. By the time he reached his house, it was nearly dark. Inside, the clock ticked too loudly. The toast from breakfast still sat in the sink. The piano, still untouched, seemed to watch him like an old friend who no longer asked questions. Raymond stood in the hallway, unzipping his coat with stiff fingers. He glanced toward the windows. Snow still fell in quiet layers. No sign of the boy, no reason to think they'd meet again, but he left the porch light on that night. He hadn't done that in years. The quilt lay folded on the back of the couch. That's as far as he got. Raymond stood beside the piano, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands dusted with flour from an attempt at baking he gave up on halfway through. The kitchen still smelled faintly of burnt crust. The sun had gone down an hour ago. The house was quiet, as always. But something felt different tonight. Not louder, just less numb. The piano sat like it always had. Mahogany body, chipped leg from the move. Two of the black keys shinier than the rest from years of overuse. He hadn't uncovered it in 5 years, but he had today. The quilt was off, the lid was up, the keys waited. He sat down slowly, as if the bench might remember too much. His fingers hovered over the keys, not touching, not yet. Middle C. He could find it in the dark if he had to. She used to laugh at that, said it was the one key he always struck too hard. He pressed it. No sound came. He realized he hadn't actually pushed it, just rested his finger there. He tried again. This time, a sound, soft, slightly flat, but real. He let the note fade, then placed both hands on the key's palms open, fingers curved from memory, but they didn't move. He stared at the space above the keys where she had once taped a note years ago. Play like you mean it, or don't bother. She'd scribbled it in blue ink, crooked, half a coffee stain at the edge. He'd left it there until it curled and peeled away on its own. He still remembered the ghost of its shape. He tried to play an arpeggio, G major. It was shaky, uneven. His left hand stumbled over the octave. His right froze halfway up the scale. He stopped. His chest tightened, not from sadness exactly, but from something worse. Something like the fear of remembering wrong. He closed the lid. The sound was final, not slammed, just firm. Raymond stood, walked to the kitchen, washed his hands like it mattered. He opened the fridge, closed it again. The toast was still in the sink from the day before. He turned off the kitchen light, then walked to the hall closet, pulled down a box he hadn't touched in years. It smelled like dust and cedar. Inside were her things, a scarf, a program from her last recital. a letter she never finished writing. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, the box open in his lap. One photo slipped out her at 27, bent over the same piano, laughing at something off camera. Raymond stared at it. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, from something older. He whispered barely, "I should have let you finish." That was all he said. He slid the photo back into the box, closed the lid, stood, walked back to the piano, paused, then without fanfare covered it again. Not forever, just not tonight. The door creaked open just after 4. Raymond didn't look up right away. He was bent over a busted dining chair, tightening the back rail with a brace clamp. Cold air slipped in through the half-open door. He felt it sting the side of his neck. He wiped his hands on a rag, turned. A boy stood in the doorway, thin frame, familiar coat, hood up. "Theo." Raymond said nothing. The boy didn't speak either. He just stepped inside, shut the door behind him, and stood with his hands deep in his pockets. His shoes left a trail of slush on the concrete floor. Raymond turned back to his work. "Bench over there," he said, voice even. "You can sit till the wind dies down." Theo hesitated, then walked across the room. Sat, shoulders tight, looking everywhere except at the man across from him. Raymond tightened the clamp 2 more turns, then released it, checked the alignment. Good enough for now. "Cold out?" he asked without looking up. Theo shrugged. Raymond tossed the rag aside. "Boots dripping," he said. Theo looked down. Snow puddled under his heels. "Grab the mop," Raymond said, nodding toward the corner. "If you're gonna track slush in, you clean it." Theo stared at him. Not defiant, not annoyed, just surprised. "You let me in," he said. "You're not a dog. I don't need to reward you." Theo blinked, then stood, walked over to the mop and dragged it across the puddle with slow, clumsy strokes. Raymond leaned against the work table, arms crossed, watching. "Ever used a mop before?" "No. Looks like it." Theo smirked faintly. Just one corner of his mouth. It disappeared as quickly as it came. Raymond pointed with his chin. "Back and forth. Not circles. You're not waxing a car." Theo adjusted. Got better. Silence fell again, but this one wasn't heavy. Just shared. Outside, wind rattled the tin awning. Inside, the shop smelled of old wood and machine oil. The kind of smell you carry on your hands long after you leave. Theo finished the spot and leaned on the mop handle. Raymond nodded. "Not bad." The boy didn't respond. "You in school today?" Raymond asked. "Kind of." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Got detention," Theo said flatly. "Deserved?" Theo shrugged. "They always think it is." Raymond didn't push, just walked to the counter, poured the last of the coffee from his thermos into a chipped ceramic cup. No offer of sugar, no milk. He set the cup on the workbench. "You want it?" Theo blinked. "It's cold," Raymond added, "and bitter." Theo walked over, picked it up, took a sip, made a face. Raymond let a breath slip out of his nose. Almost a laugh. Almost. The boy set the cup back down. "I still have your gloves," Theo said quietly. "I figured." Theo looked around the shop. Tools hung on the walls, neatly arranged. Every item had a place, even the dust looked intentional. "You fix furniture?" he asked. "I fix things that used to mean something." Theo nodded once, like that made sense. He didn't ask more. Outside, the sky had begun to turn, that flat, deep gray that comes before early darkness. Raymond glanced at the clock, almost 5. "You got somewhere to be?" "Not really." "Well," Raymond said, walking back to the work table, "then mop the rest of the floor." Theo looked up. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. You missed spots." The boy looked at the floor. then at the mop. Then he got to work again. And Raymond, for the first time in a very long time, didn't feel like he was waiting for something to end. He felt like something had begun. It was near dark when Raymond saw him again. The snowfall had thickened. Fat, slow flakes drifting like ash from a sky that didn't care who watched. Streetlights flickered on one by one, casting halos of pale yellow through the cold. Raymond was walking home the long way. He did that sometimes out of habit more than need. Past the laundromat, past the old bakery that hadn't opened since spring. The streets were empty the way they always were once the cold set in deep. Then he saw a shape curled on the bus stop bench. Not lying down, just sitting. Knees pulled tight, arms crossed, hood up. Theo. His backpack sat at his feet, soggy at the corners. He wasn't waiting for a bus. There hadn't been one through this part of town after 6 years. Raymond stopped a few steps away. Theo didn't look up. He was shivering, slight but noticeable. The kind of cold that gets into your chest starts to slow the blood. Raymond said nothing. He unzipped his coat, pulled it off in one smooth motion. Thick canvas, lined with old wool. Heavy from years of wear, but still warm. He stepped forward and laid the coat beside the boy carefully, not like a favor, not like charity, just a placement, a quiet offering. Theo flinched slightly when he noticed the movement, turned his head, their eyes met, no explanation, no invitation, just a moment. Raymond nodded once, that was it, then turned and kept walking. Behind him, he didn't hear footsteps, didn't expect thanks, didn't need it. At the next corner, he paused and looked up, snow gathering on his sleeves. The cold bit harder without the coat, but somehow his chest felt steadier than it had in days. He didn't look back, didn't have to. When he got home, the porch light was still on, the inside of the house colder than usual. He lit the small gas stove in the kitchen and poured hot water into an old enamel mug, sat at the table with both hands wrapped around it, trying to feel something other than numb. From the window he could see the snow still falling, still silent. He closed his eyes, thought of nothing in particular. Then, as if on cue, the kettle whistled again louder than it needed to. He let it. He reached for the clock on the wall, nudged the minute hand forward, still 5 minutes slow. He left it that way. The wind outside had calmed by late afternoon, but the light was still the color of steel, gray, unmoving. Raymond was in the back room, sanding the legs of a rocking chair, when he heard it. A sound he hadn't heard in 5 winters. 3 notes, soft, uncertain, not a song, not even a phrase, just a child's fingers pressing cautiously on the lower end of the piano. Raymond paused, not because he was startled he had left the side door unlocked, knew someone might walk in eventually, but because of what those 3 notes did. They didn't echo much in the room. The walls absorbed sound like grief absorbed joy. He stood quietly, wiped his hands on his apron, and stepped into the doorway. Theo was sitting on the piano bench, hunched forward, no gloves, hair damp from melted snow, one foot tucked under the other like he wasn't sure he was allowed to stay. He played another note, then 2, wrong combination, then tried again. Raymond didn't speak. He walked into the room, moved to the side cabinet, and retrieved a tuning lever from the small wooden drawer beneath the bookshelf. He crouched beside the piano, lifted the lid gently. The strings underneath were tarnished, one slightly frayed near the G sharp. Theo glanced sideways but didn't move. "You're flat," Raymond said, still not looking at him. Theo kept his eyes on the keys. "Didn't mean to play." "Didn't say you did." Raymond adjusted the lever, gave the string a careful turn, then plucked it with his finger. Still flat. Theo pressed a single note soft enough not to interfere. Raymond stopped, turned the peg again. Clearer now. Theo tried 2 notes in sequence. His hands were stiff but not careless. Somewhere, once, someone had taught him something. You've played before, Raymond said. Theo shrugged. A little. In 5th grade, school had one. You remember any of it? Not really. Raymond straightened up, wiped his hands again, then sat on the edge of the armchair across from the piano. Not looming, just there. Theo kept playing simple things, a sequence of 4 notes that looped, always missing the 5th. It wasn't music, but it wasn't noise either. Raymond closed his eyes. Let it happen. Let the room fill not with melody, but with motion, with something alive. The clock ticked. The stove creaked. Outside, the snow fell in silence. Inside, a boy who rarely spoke pressed another note, then another. Not always the right ones, but not empty. Raymond didn't tell him to stop, didn't tell him to keep going. He just sat, listening, breathing. The kind of silence that didn't push people apart, but made room for them. Theo fumbled a chord, winced. Raymond said, "That's a C major. Your pinky missed the G." Theo looked at him. First time they'd made eye contact in minutes. How do you know? Raymond gave a half smile, the kind you only make when a memory stings and soothes at the same time. I used to live with someone who hit every G like it mattered. Theo didn't ask who, didn't need to. He adjusted his hand, played the chord again. It landed. Raymond nodded once, then stood, walked to the kitchen, returned with 2 mugs. One of them was the same chipped enamel Theo had used before. He set it down on the piano. Still bitter, he said. Theo didn't smile, but he drank. The clock ticked on. No song ever formed. No grand duet. Just the quiet rhythm of 2 people sitting near the same silence. And that, for now, was enough. The knock came just after 6. Raymond opened the door to find Lainey standing there, wrapped in a long gray coat, hair damp from the snow. She wasn't angry, but her jaw was tight. She hadn't come for pleasantry. "Is he here?" she asked. Raymond didn't blink. "He's inside." Lainey stepped in, brushing snow from her sleeves. Her eyes swept the room like a searchlight trained from years of dealing with students who disappeared into corners. Theo wasn't in sight. Likely in the back, still avoiding every conversation that sounded like authority. "You didn't think to call?" she asked, voice low, even. He knocked. It was snowing. He was suspended. "I didn't ask for a transcript." Lainey folded her arms. Her gaze landed on the piano uncovered. She paused. "You play?" Raymond shrugged. "Used to." The lid was open, the bench slightly off-center. 1 page of handwritten sheet music rested across the stand. No title, just a few lines in blue ink, the bottom left smudged like someone had wept on it once and never wiped it clean. Lainey stepped closer, read a few bars, then stopped. Her breath caught, not loud, not theatrical, just a sharp, small intake of air like something had pressed against her chest. Raymond noticed but said nothing. Lainey reached out and touched the edge of the page very lightly as though it might crumble. Then she stepped back. "I've seen this before," she said, voice thinner than a moment ago. Raymond didn't answer. "My sister used to write music like that. Same pen, same half-measure gaps between bars, like she couldn't decide where to breathe." Raymond tilted his head slightly. "She a pianist?" Lainey nodded. "Used to be. Gave it up. Said music only makes you feel too much at once." He let that hang in the air, didn't challenge it. Maybe he even agreed. "She's still alive?" he asked. Lainey hesitated. "No." It was the first time she'd said it aloud in over a year. Raymond didn't say sorry, just walked into the kitchen, poured hot water into 2 mugs and brought them both back, one for her, one for himself. Lainey accepted it. They sat, not across from each other, just near. The piano between them like a quiet witness. After a while, Lainey asked, "Why him?" Raymond looked up. Theo, why let him in? He thought for a moment, then said, He knocked. That's it? That's enough. Lainey looked down at her cup, steam rising in soft, curling lines. I've worked in schools 15 years, she said. I can usually tell which kids are going to float and which are going to sink. Theo's the kind who refuses to do either. He just drifts, and drifting's the worst. Raymond nodded. I know the type. They sat in silence again. Outside, the wind picked up just enough to rattle a loose screen. Theo appeared in the hallway, then silent, watching. He didn't step into the room, didn't interrupt. Lainey looked at him, her face softened barely but enough. I'll walk you home, she said. Theo shook his head. I'll stay, he muttered. Lainey looked to Raymond, surprised, but Raymond simply sipped his tea. That was the end of the conversation. Lainey stood, adjusted her coat, looked at the piano one more time. The page still sat there, silent, unfinished. If you ever play that, she said softly, don't skip the repeat. She probably meant for someone to hear it twice. Raymond nodded. No promise, no smile, just understanding. Lainey left. The door closed. Raymond stayed seated. Theo stepped into the room, sat on the bench again, didn't play, just sat. The house was quiet. The page on the piano stirred slightly from the heat of the stove. And the repeat mark on the second line waited, just in case someone dared start again. The fire in the stove had gone low, one log left smoldering. Raymond sat in the armchair across from the piano, a blanket across his knees, mug half full in his hand. The house was still, the kind of still that feels like waiting. He looked toward the piano, uncovered now, open. The page of sheet music still rested where Lainey had seen it. But tonight he didn't see Lainey's reaction. He saw hers, her handwriting, her hand, stained faintly with ink. The way she used to hum while scribbling, forget the world was still spinning outside the window. Her name was Clara. He hadn't spoken it aloud in over 3 years. He remembered the day she started that piece. It was raining, spring. He was fixing the cabinet door that wouldn't shut right, and she kept playing the same 5 notes over and over, humming in fragments. Does it end happy? He'd asked, passing by. She laughed. Does anything? That was her, half serious, half smiling, wholehearted in everything except endings. She hated finishing things, said it felt like closing a door no one could reopen. Raymond leaned back, eyes half closed. He could see her there, in that same room, barefoot, hair tied up messily, lost in the keys like they were the only thing keeping her breathing. She never got to finish the song. By the time the diagnosis came, she'd already stopped playing. The last few months were quiet, not tragic, not melodramatic, just quiet. He remembered slicing fruit she didn't eat, reading books neither of them followed, the clock ticking slightly out of sync with the beat of her breath, and the piano silent. When she died, he covered it the next morning, didn't touch it again for years, not because it hurt, but because he was afraid it wouldn't. Raymond took another sip from the mug, cold now. He didn't mind. His eyes drifted to the paper. The composition was barely half a page. The melody reached a swell at bar 16, then dropped off mid-thought. No final chord, no resolve. He knew the notes by heart, had them memorized in the back of his hands, but he had never dared add to them. Finishing it felt like pretending he understood her, and that somehow felt worse than forgetting. He stood, crossed the room, sat on the bench, the keys weighted clean, slightly uneven in temperature under his fingers. He played the first bar, then the second. The melody moved slow, unsure, like walking barefoot across a cold floor. At bar 16, his fingers paused. That's where it always stopped. That's where she stopped. He closed his eyes, and lifted his hands, then lowered the lid. Not tonight. Some music wasn't meant to be finished by someone else. He stood gently. The paper stayed where it was. He didn't take it down, didn't put it away. He just left it there. Because some things aren't finished. They're just left open for someone else to return to. It was the kind of evening that smelled like wood glue and quiet regret. Raymond was sanding down the edge of a small table when Lainey walked in. She didn't knock, just stepped inside like she had the right to. Like silence didn't scare her anymore. He looked up briefly, nodded toward the stool near the wall. She sat without asking. No words for a while. The radio on the shelf played something soft. Just guitar, no voice. Lainey rested her hands on her lap, took a breath, not deep, just steady. Then she said, "My husband left 5 years ago. Well, technically, he left 6 times before that, but 5 years ago was the one that stuck." Raymond didn't look at her, just kept sanding. He came back for a while, promised things, said all the right words, brought flowers that died in 2 days. You know the kind. Raymond gave the faintest nod. Lainey smiled, but it was dry. I used to think I was the kind of person who could fix things. Students, systems, people. Turns out I just made excuses better than most. She paused, then continued. He had a daughter from before me. She stayed with us some weekends. Sweet kid, quiet. I think she understood him better than I did. Or maybe she just didn't expect much. Raymond set the sandpaper down, not because he was done, but because the moment asked for stillness. Lainey looked around the room at the tool, the varnish cans, the neat rows of brushes. "This place," she said, "smells like the basement of the house we rented, before everything fell apart." Raymond finally looked at her. Just for a second. She met his eyes. "I don't tell people this stuff," she said, "not because I'm ashamed, but because it never changes anything." Raymond didn't answer. Let her keep going. "I think I stopped trusting people the day I realized I had no idea what love looked like when it wasn't breaking." Her voice didn't crack. She didn't cry. It was scar tissue talking, and that, somehow, was harder to listen to than fresh pain. "I'm not asking for pity," she added. "I just didn't want you to think I only see Theo as a file on my desk." Raymond reached over to the small workbench, picked up a cloth, began wiping sawdust from the tabletop, then said quietly, "You see him clearer than most." Lainey leaned back against the wall. "I don't know what to do with him," she admitted. "He's not bad, just tired, like he's been disappointed more than someone his age should have been." Raymond folded the cloth, set it down. "We all have a threshold," he said. "Some people hit it earlier." Lainey looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You ever wonder if people like us who've watched good things fall apart are even capable of letting someone in again?" Raymond didn't answer right away, but the way he looked at her said enough. Not certainty, not hope, but willingness, and that, in its quiet way, was braver than both. The kitchen table was too small for 3 people. The chairs didn't match. The overhead light flickered once, then held steady. But the food was warm, a pot of stew, 2 cracked bowls, 1 chipped plate for the bread. Raymond served without ceremony, ladled stew like he'd done it 1,000 times. He hadn't. This was the first time in years he'd cooked for more than one. Lainey sat across from him, her sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. Theo sat to the side, hunched, spoon gripped awkwardly. No one spoke for the first few minutes. Only the sound of spoons against ceramic, the occasional clink of glass. Raymond poured water from a pitcher into 3 cups. It felt strangely formal. Lainey broke a piece of bread and passed the rest to Theo. He took it, eyes lowered. The stove clicked softly behind them. The walls breathed with the settling snow outside. At one point, Raymond looked up and caught Theo glancing at the potted plant on the windowsill. Small fern, barely alive, the tips of its leaves browned. Theo stared at it between bites, then asked suddenly, "What does a tree live on?" Laney paused, spoon mid-air. Raymond set his cup down slowly. Theo looked between them. "I mean, what keeps it alive?" Raymond considered. "Sunlight," he said. "Water. Soil." Theo shook his head. "I don't mean the science part. I mean when it's all alone. In winter, when no one sees it." Laney leaned forward slightly. Her voice was soft. "Maybe it remembers spring." Theo didn't say anything, just chewed slowly, then nodded like he understood something no one had quite said. The room felt different after that, like someone had opened a window, even if the glass stayed shut. Raymond refilled his bowl, pushed the bread basket slightly closer to Theo. Laney took off her jacket and draped it on the chair behind her like she wasn't just visiting anymore. Theo asked, quieter this time, "Can something grow again? Even if it dies in the cold?" Raymond looked at him, not with pity, just with the kind of gaze you give a question too big to answer quickly. "Yes," he said simply. "Some things do." Theo went quiet, but not withdrawn. His shoulders relaxed, just a little. Laney glanced at the window. The plant still sat there, tired but upright. She reached over, turned the pot so the greener side faced the light. Theo noticed, didn't say anything, but this time he smiled, just a little, and it stayed. For the rest of the meal, no one asked anything more. No one explained their silences. No one apologized for what they didn't know how to fix. They just ate. And for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel like it was waiting for something to break. It felt instead like something small had begun to grow. The hallway smelled of disinfectant and cheap anxiety, the kind that lingered long after the shouting stopped. Theo sat outside the vice principal's office, one leg bouncing, knuckles raw. His hoodie was speckled with dried mud. His backpack lay flat on the floor beside him, half unzipped. Across the hall, the custodian wheeled a mop bucket past him without speaking. The door opened. Laney stepped out. She didn't sit, just crossed her arms and stared. "You want to tell me what happened?" Theo shrugged. "He pushed me first." "That's not what 3 other kids said." "Then they're lying." Her tone didn't rise. It never did. "That's not the point," she said. Theo leaned his head against the cold wall, eyes on the floor. "I'm suspended, right?" Laney didn't answer. Because just then, down the hall came the creak of the front door, heavy boots on tile, measured steps. Raymond. He didn't carry a coat. Snow clung to his shoulders, melting into his sweater. He didn't look at anyone, didn't ask questions. He walked straight past Laney, past Theo, stopped in front of the old upright piano near the trophy case. Nobody played it anymore. It was out of tune. A quarter of the keys stuck on rainy days. Raymond lifted the lid, brushed dust from the ivory, then sat. The hallway fell still. Theo looked up, startled. Raymond placed his fingers on the keys, took a slow breath, played 5 notes, only 5, soft, familiar, the beginning of Clara's unfinished song. Then he stopped, closed the lid, stood, didn't say a word, just turned toward Theo. Their eyes met, and something in Theo's jaw loosened. Not apology, not fear, just the first crack in a wall built too fast, too young. Raymond stepped back, nodded once to Laney, then left. No lecture, no rescue, no deal, just 5 notes. Theo sat there long after he was gone. Laney didn't move either. Finally, she sat beside the boy. "He came for you," she said quietly. Theo wiped a sleeve across his cheek. "It was just 5 notes, he muttered. Laney looked at the closed piano. "No," she said. "It was an answer." The snow had thickened by nightfall. It clung to street signs and telephone wires like memory quiet and weightless until you noticed how much had gathered. Laney knocked once, then again. Raymond opened the door without a word. He looked surprised but not annoyed, just tired in the way that happens when silence has become a second skin. She stepped inside, took off her coat, shook off the snow, and paused. Raymond sat on the couch, not with a book, not with coffee, but with a ball of wool in his lap and needles in his hands. He was knitting, slowly, methodically, a deep gray scarf, soft and even, nearly halfway done. Laney stared, blinking once. "You knit?" Raymond didn't look up. "I fix things." She gave a faint breath of a laugh. "I thought you meant chairs and clocks." "I meant whatever's fraying." He kept working, row after row, no rush. Laney sat across from him, legs crossed, fingers wrapped around a mug he handed her without asking. The tea was warm, unsweetened. "I haven't seen anyone knit since my grandmother," she said. "She teach you?" "No, I watched, then forgot." Raymond glanced up. "Shame. Good for the hands. And the head." Laney looked at him, really looked. The way his shoulders curled inward, not from defeat but from habit. The way the scarf draped neatly across his knees, the way he didn't need to fill the room with noise, she said softly. "Do you ever get lonely?" Raymond's fingers paused, just a second, then resumed. "Sometimes," he said, "mostly at night, when I think I've finished something and there's no one there to see it." Laney nodded slowly. "I get lonely in crowds," she said. "It's like everyone's talking past me, like I'm standing behind glass." He didn't ask why, didn't need to. She sipped her tea. "After my sister died, I thought I'd fall apart, but instead I just kept going. Work, groceries, emails, and somewhere in that rhythm I just disappeared." Raymond set the scarf down, leaned forward. "What brought you back?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "A boy who doesn't know how to ask for help, and a man who answers with music instead of words." Raymond met her gaze, quietly, fully. "No one teaches us how to stay," he said, "only how to leave, or survive the leaving." Laney looked toward the window. Snow tapped gently against the glass. Somewhere nearby a dog barked, muffled by distance and cold. She whispered, "I'm tired of surviving." Raymond nodded. "I know." They sat like that. Two people who weren't young anymore, who had loved and lost and kept going anyway. Not heroic, not broken, just still here. The kettle hissed faintly in the background. Raymond picked up the scarf, continued knitting. Laney leaned back, and for the first time in months, her shoulders dropped a little. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something else began to settle. Not a romance, not a rescue, just warmth, slow and real. Like wool between fingers on a winter night. The piano lid was open again. Raymond crouched low, one hand inside the belly of the instrument, tightening the G string again. It never quite held tune the way the others did, always a little defiant. Theo sat on the bench, watching. Not fidgeting, not rushing, just present. "Try it again," Raymond said. Theo pressed the key. The note rang out slightly flat. Raymond frowned, adjusted a quarter turn. Theo tried again, closer. "One more time." Theo nodded, pressed the key once more. This time the note landed clean, warm, balanced. Raymond exhaled through his nose. "That's the one." He started to pull his hand back, but in that moment Theo reached to lift the lid brace and their hands touched. It wasn't long, just skin on skin, but Raymond froze only for half a second. Theo did too. Neither pulled away immediately. It wasn't awkward, wasn't intense, just quiet, like two people standing at the edge of something neither had named. Theo finally moved first, let go of the brace. Sat back. Raymond withdrew his hand, wiped it absently on a cloth. No one said anything. But the silence had shifted. Theo looked down at the keys. You ever get scared you'll break it? Raymond raised an eyebrow. The piano? Theo shook his head. Not just that. Anything. Someone. Raymond took a long breath, then said, Every time I play. Theo nodded, and for the first time really smiled. Not a smirk, not a flicker, a real smile. Raymond didn't smile back right away, but his eyes softened. The kind of look that says, I see you. You're safe here. They didn't speak again. The piano stayed open. The note held true, and outside the wind didn't howl for once. The fire was burning down to red. Theo sat on the floor, legs stretched out, back against the couch. Raymond sat in the armchair, a worn blanket over his lap, one hand cupping a mug that had gone cold. Neither of them seemed to care. The piano sat quiet across from them, lid open, keys still. Theo had played a few clumsy notes earlier. Nothing structured, just sound, like tapping the walls of a place to see if it echoed. Now he looked at the sheet of music still resting on the stand, unfinished. Who wrote that? He asked. Raymond didn't answer right away. He followed Theo's gaze. His eyes rested on the page as if seeing it for the first time in years. My wife, he said finally. Theo looked over. Raymond didn't flinch at the word. She never titled it, he continued. Said she wasn't sure where it was going. But I think that was just her way of avoiding an ending. He shifted in his chair. She'd get halfway through a piece and stop. Say the melody got ahead of her, like the music knew more than she did, drove her crazy. Theo watched him closely. Quiet. Raymond nodded toward the sheet. That's the last one she worked on. She wrote it over a week. Never made it past the 16th bar. Theo studied the page again. Why not finish it? He asked. Raymond looked down at his hands, turned the mug slowly. Because if I write the next note, he said softly, it's not hers anymore. The fire cracked. A small spark leapt, then vanished. I've sat at that piano 100 times, Raymond continued. Heard it in my head, even knew where she might have gone with it. But I couldn't do it. Finishing it would mean closing a door that hasn't moved in years. Theo nodded once, quietly, then asked, maybe it doesn't need to be finished, just played. Raymond looked at him. And in that moment there was no age between them. Just two people who'd loved someone that left and didn't know what to do with what was left behind. I used to think music was about precision, Raymond said. Now I think it's about permission, letting things be heard even if they're not perfect, even if they ache. Theo looked back at the piano. I think she'd want it heard. Raymond didn't reply. He just breathed out, slow, deep, real. Then almost to himself he said, it's not the ending I'm afraid of. It's the silence after. The door creaked as Raymond stepped inside. The air was still warm from the stove, though no fire burned. His boots left faint prints on the entry mat, dusted with salt and snow. He set his keys down, then stopped. There was sound, faint, uneven, piano, not scales, not fumbling. A melody halting, unsure but trying. Raymond moved quietly down the hallway, his breath caught before he reached the room. The song, her song. Someone was playing the unfinished piece, no. Not just playing it, continuing it. Raymond stood in the doorway, unseen. Theo was at the bench, shoulders tense, fingers moving with more heart than precision. His left pinky stumbled over a chord, his right hand hesitated, then pushed forward. Bar 16 passed, then 17, then 18. What came after wasn't elegant, the timing slipped, the rhythm wavered, but the feeling was there, unfiltered, raw. The boy wasn't trying to fix the piece, he was answering it. Raymond didn't speak, didn't interrupt. He just stood there, frozen in place as the final notes hung in the air, shaky, unresolved, but brave. Theo didn't know he had an audience. When he finished, he kept his hands on the keys for a moment, breathing through his nose, eyes down. Then he reached into his pocket, took out a folded piece of paper, placed it gently on the edge of the piano, and stood. That's when he saw Raymond. Their eyes locked. Theo froze. "I didn't mean to," he started. Raymond raised a hand, gentle, not scolding. "No," he said, voice low. "You did exactly what she never could." Theo looked down, embarrassed. "I know it wasn't right. I wanted to know how it might have felt to hear it finished." Raymond stepped forward, picked up the sheet of music. The ink from Clara's original bars had faded slightly over time. But now, there were new notes, scribbled in pencil after the last line, clumsy, imperfect, but sincere. Theo said quietly, "Huts. I can erase it if you want." Raymond didn't answer right away. Then he shook his head. "No," he said. "Don't. That belongs here now." Theo watched him, waiting. Raymond looked back at the piano, and for the first time in years he sat, placed both hands on the keys, played from the beginning. This time he didn't stop at bar 16, and when he reached Theo's new ending, he didn't correct it. He played it exactly as written, and let the silence after it settle not as a wound, but as a choice. The porch creaked under their weight. Lainey sat with her knees drawn up, arms resting loosely on them. Raymond handed her a mug, nothing fancy, just hot water with lemon. She didn't ask for it. He didn't ask if she wanted any. They sat in parallel silence, watching the snow slowly shrink along the edges of the path. Drops of meltwater tapped steadily from the roof gutter, each one a soft tick in the still air. After a long while, she said, "I had a son." Raymond didn't move, didn't speak. She wasn't waiting for permission. "He was born too early," she said. "Barely cried. His name was Jonah." The name sat in the air for a moment, like it hadn't been spoken in years. "Only lived 6 days," she continued, voice steady in a way that almost made it worse. "I didn't hold him as much as I should have. I kept thinking if I didn't get attached, it'd hurt less when it happened." Raymond stared out toward the line of trees, didn't flinch. Lainey took a sip of the water. Her hands didn't shake, but her voice thinned. "People told me it wasn't my fault. The doctors, my sister, the grief counselor. But I'd skipped a prenatal checkup that month. I was tired. I said I'd reschedule and never did." She drew in a breath, quiet, measured. "That's the part no one knows, not even my ex." She looked over at Raymond now. Her eyes weren't pleading, just tired of hiding. "I tell myself it wouldn't have changed anything, that he still would have come early, that it wasn't me. But there's a voice I can't shut off. It says I chose convenience over caution. And my son paid for it." Raymond turned to her. His voice was low but steady. "That voice isn't truth. It's punishment." Lainey blinked once, then twice. "I think I punished myself so long I forgot what forgiveness sounds like." Raymond didn't offer a solution, didn't reach out, just sat beside her close, but not close enough to break the space she'd built. "He was small," she said. "I don't remember the sound of his cry, but I remember his fingernails. They were perfect, like little commas." The wind stirred. A branch creaked above them. Lainey wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, not crying, just clearing the air between memory and breath. "I used to think if I ever opened up again, if I let someone close, they'd see the worst thing in me. Not the grief, the guilt." Raymond nodded once. "I see someone who stayed," he said, "even when it got quiet." Lainey looked at him. There was no grand realization, no musical cue, just the slow, unfamiliar weight of being understood. She let out a breath long, slow, looked back out toward the trees. You think things bloom again after this kind of cold? Raymond didn't answer right away, then quietly, only if someone's still watching when they do. The front door was open, not wide, just ajar. But in a house like Raymond's, where every door was kept shut against the cold, that meant something. He found the folded blanket on the couch, the mug in the sink, the gloves missing from the windowsill, and no Theo. No note this time, just silence. Raymond's heart thudded in that way it hadn't in years. Not panic, not yet, but something close. He moved through the house, checking each room even though he already knew, calling the boy's name once, then again louder. No answer. He grabbed his coat, his boots, one arm already in the sleeve by the time Lainey arrived, breath visible in the morning air. She saw his face. He's gone? She asked. Raymond nodded once, jaw tight. Lainey stepped inside, closed the door behind her. Snow clung to the hem of her pants. I'll check the train station, Raymond said. Maybe the bus depot. Lainey didn't move. Raymond, she said gently. Wait. He was already halfway to the door again. He's a kid, he muttered. He doesn't know what he's doing. He knows more than you think. Raymond turned, voice sharper than he meant. He's a child. Lainey stepped closer, quiet but firm. So were you, when you lost her. The words stopped him cold. She softened. I know what it's like to want to fix it before it gets worse. To follow someone just so you won't have to feel it again. He didn't respond, just stared at the floor, breath short. Lainey walked to him, slower now. But if you chase him now, she said, he'll think love only shows up when he disappears. Raymond clenched his fists, not in anger, in helplessness. He's out there, he said, alone. Lainey nodded. And right now, he needs space more than saving. Raymond looked away. Out the frosted window, branches heavy with snow, tracks in the yard already softening. She added, quieter. If he's learned anything from you, it's that someone will be here when he's ready to come back. Raymond didn't speak, but he didn't reach for the doorknob again. Lainey placed a hand gently on his arm. Not all absence is abandonment, she said. Sometimes it's just breathing room. The two of them stood there, in the hush of a house that had held so much stillness, and now maybe needed to learn how to wait. The room was dim, lit only by a wash of gray light from the windows. Snow fell gently, steady like breath. The kind that made no sound, just softened the world by degrees. Raymond stood in front of the piano. He didn't rush, just stood there a moment, hand resting on the edge of the worn wood, tracing the grooves that had faded under Clara's fingers years ago. The lid was already open. The sheet music was there, creased, marked, smudged with ink and memory. Half in Clara's hand, half in Theo's. He sat down. The bench gave a faint creak, a familiar weight returning to it. Raymond let his hands hover over the keys. His fingers, older now, stiffer than they once were, didn't shake. He took a slow breath and began. The first notes came soft, deliberate, not because he was unsure, but because he was choosing to feel every one. The melody moved through the early bars, the ones she had played over and over, the ones that used to haunt him in the quiet between days. He didn't rush them, didn't try to improve them. He let the rest sit where she left them, let the silences breathe. Bar 16 came, the familiar place where Clara had always stopped. Raymond didn't. He kept going. Into Theo's ending. The pencil marks weren't precise. The transitions were messy. There were phrasing quirks Clara never would have written. But it worked. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. And Raymond played it exactly as it was, No corrections, no polish, just feeling. As the last chord settled into the room, he kept his hands on the keys. The vibration beneath his palms faded slowly, like the end of a sentence that didn't need punctuation. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel afraid of the silence that followed. He leaned back slightly, exhaled through his nose. His eyes, damp but clear, rested on the empty room. The photo of Clara still sat on the bookshelf, not central, not framed in light, just there. He looked at it now, and instead of ache, he felt something else, something like permission. Raymond stood, closed the piano lid gently, and left the music on the stand. He didn't put it away, because now it no longer needed hiding. Now it had been heard. The sky had begun to clear slowly, like someone peeling back a gray curtain. Raymond sat on the porch steps, mug in hand, steam curling faintly upward. The snow had stopped, and in its place came a hush that wasn't silence, just a kind of listening. He watched the edge of the woods, the empty road, the spot where Theo had once stood holding a pair of gloves too big for his hands. He didn't expect anything tonight, not really. But then he heard the crunch, light, careful, footsteps across the crusted snow. He turned slowly, and there he was, Theo standing at the edge of the yard halfway between shadow and light. Coat zipped high, shoulders slightly hunched, hair damp and wind-tossed, and on his head, the scarf, Raymond's scarf, the one he thought he'd left in a drawer, the one he hadn't finished weaving until late one night when sleep wouldn't come and silence felt too sharp. Theo didn't speak. He didn't wave, didn't smile. He just looked at Raymond with that same raw stillness he'd had at the piano, then slowly he stepped up onto the porch. Stopped just outside the threshold, a few feet between them. Raymond didn't move, didn't rise, but he set his mug down beside him and opened the door just wide enough. No words passed between them, but none were needed because the scarf said everything. I left, but I didn't let go. I'm still learning how to stay. Raymond stepped aside. Theo walked in, and behind them, the first breeze of early thaw lifted a single leaf from the porch railing and let it fall gently into the snow. The house was quiet, but not the same quiet as before. This was not the hush of absence. It was the quiet of early morning, of toast crackling in the old iron pan, of water filling a kettle without rush. Raymond moved through the kitchen without sound, familiar in his motions, 2 mugs out, one more than usual. Behind him, Theo sat at the small table, sketching something in a notebook with a pencil that had seen better days. He wasn't trying to hide it, but he wasn't ready to show it either. Lainey leaned against the door frame, sleeves pushed up, hair damp from snowmelt. She didn't speak, just watched the steam rise from the kettle and let herself breathe. Everything was ordinary, and that made it sacred. On the windowsill above the sink, the fern once browning, once forgotten, was green. New shoots unfurled at the center, bright and unapologetic, like it had decided quietly and without permission that it would live. Raymond noticed it. He didn't say anything, just nodded once as if to greet an old friend returning home. He poured water into mugs, handed one to Lainey. She took it without comment, their fingers brushing briefly at the handle. Theo looked up, noticed the fern. "Looks different," he murmured. Raymond glanced over. "So do you." Theo smiled, not wide, but real. No one filled the space with speeches, no one declared a new beginning. They just let the morning be. And in that small kitchen, with mismatched chairs and soft footsteps, something had changed. Not loudly, not suddenly, but completely. The light in the workshop was honey-colored, pouring in low through the dusty window panes. Dust floated like slow snow in the beams, caught between wood shavings and the faint scent of old varnish. Lainey stood by the shelves, fingers grazing the edge of a half-repaired chair. She looked peaceful, but not idle, the kind of stillness that came after long walking. Raymond entered from the back room, a folded sheet of paper in his hand. She turned when she heard his steps. He didn't speak at first, just walked over, held out the paper. She hesitated. "What is it?" He gave a quiet smile. No title, no ending, just the opening bars. She unfolded it carefully. On the page, a few handwritten lines of music, beautiful, spare, unfinished. It was Clara's handwriting. Lainey looked up. "I thought you finished this with Theo." "I did," he said, "but that was his version. This is for yours." She stared at the page. A soft crease formed between her brows. "I don't know how to write music." Raymond shrugged gently. "Doesn't matter." She laughed once, under her breath. "So what am I supposed to do with it?" He met her gaze. Calm, soft, but certain. "Write what comes next." Lainey held the sheet in both hands now. She didn't speak for a long moment. The paper wasn't heavy, but it felt like it carried more than ink. "I'm not a composer," she whispered. Raymond tilted his head. "No one starts out as one." She glanced back at the notes, then out the window, where the snow had melted into glistening puddles along the fence. "You think it'll be any good?" "I think it'll be yours," he said. "And that's enough." Her eyes didn't fill. Not quite. But something behind them shifted like a door creaking open in a room long sealed. She nodded slowly, folded the sheet back, held it close like something not yet born but already real. "Thank you," she said. Raymond didn't answer, just reached for the nearby coat rack, lifted a second hook into place, a gesture so small and yet it made room. The sun was beginning to dip, washing the kitchen in amber light. Long shadows stretched across the wooden floor, and somewhere outside, water dripped steadily from the corner of the roof. Raymond placed a pot on the table. Steam rose gently from it, something simple. Bread was cut thick and uneven. 3 plates, mismatched. No centerpiece. Lainey walked in from the hallway, sleeves rolled up, hair pulled back, carrying 3 spoons. She set them down without fanfare. Theo followed quietly behind her, holding a folded napkin in both hands. He didn't ask where to sit. He didn't need to. The chairs weren't assigned, but they knew where they belonged. Raymond sat first, then Lainey, then Theo. No one said grace. No one reached for their phones. No one filled the silence. Because this silence wasn't empty anymore. Theo dipped his spoon into the stew, blew on it once, tasted, made a small sound, not quite approval, not quite surprise, just recognition. Lainey passed him a slice of bread without a word. He took it. Raymond watched them both, not closely, just enough, then reached for his own bowl. From the window, the fern on the sill caught the light, full, green, open. Lainey noticed it. So did Theo. No one pointed it out. But the 3 of them glanced toward it, then back to one another. That was enough. There were no big declarations, no sudden embraces, no "let's start over" or "we're a family now." But there were gestures. Lainey refilled Raymond's mug without asking. Theo tore a piece of bread in half and slid one part to her plate. Raymond looked down the table and simply smiled, a small, worn thing, but steady. The clock on the wall ticked. A breeze stirred the curtain. The room was full of quiet presence, of time unhurried, of wounds that had learned how to breathe. Outside, the snow was gone from the porch. Mud and stone showed through, but so did sprigs of green, impossibly small, impossibly stubborn. Theo glanced at the door, then at Raymond. Raymond gave a slight nod, just once. Theo got up, stepped outside barefoot onto the cool wood and placed something on the railing. The scarf, dry now, neatly folded, left not as rejection but as trust, as if to say, "I'll need it again someday, but not tonight." He stepped back in, let the door close behind him without a sound. Sat back at the table. Raymond passed him the salt. Laney reached for the kettle, and the three of them ate, like they'd done it 100 times before. Not as a miracle, not as redemption, but as people who stayed and chose each other without ever needing to say it out loud.